She looked him in the eyes, the most powerful alpha alive, and said nothing. For 25 years she carried a secret so heavy it bent her spine, so dangerous it could burn an entire kingdom to the ground, and tonight it was finally going to come out. Stay, you need to hear every word of this. The night the forest went silent was the night everything broke, not slowly, not gently. It broke the way old bone breaks, sudden, loud, and with a sound that travels through everything around it before the pain even begins. Alpha Kayne stood at the edge of the forest clearing, and he was not breathing. His chest was still. His jaw was locked. His hands, which had crushed stone walls during his most terrible rages, were hanging loose at his sides, not because he was calm, but because his body had forgotten what to do with itself. In the middle of the clearing, bathed in moonlight so bright it looked like a painting, stood his Luna Sera, his mate, the woman the moon herself had chosen for him, bound to him by bond, by blood, by 25 years of shared breath, and she was in another man's arms. Kayne's wolf did not howl. It went cold. There is a kind of rage that is loud, roaring, violent, destructive, and then there is the kind that is silent. The kind that is so deep and so complete that it stops making noise altogether and simply becomes a force. A gravity, something that pulls everything toward it and crushes it quietly. That was what moved through Kayne in that moment. He saw the man's arms around Sera. He saw Sera's face turned upward, not pulling away, not fighting. He saw the way her hands gripped the front of the man's shirt, not to push him back, but holding on. And then he saw the man lower his head and press his lips to Sera's forehead. Soft, tender, like he had done it before, like he had the right. Kayne's vision went red at the edges. He did not know how long he stood there. Time had stopped making sense. The wind had stopped. The crickets had stopped. Even the trees seemed to lean away from him, and trees do not lean away from things that are not dangerous. He was the alpha of the Blackwood pack, one of the oldest, most feared packs in all the ancient territories. His bloodline stretched back 12 generations of dominant alphas, each one more powerful than the last. He had fought rival packs at 19. He had survived an assassination attempt at 23. He had once held a collapsing cave wall with his bare hands long enough for 12 of his warriors to escape. He was not a man who stood still while the world broke around him. And yet he stood still, because the woman in that clearing was not just his Luna. She was the only living thing that had ever made him afraid. Not afraid of her, afraid of losing her. And that fear was the only thing in the world strong enough to root him to the ground when every other instinct in him was screaming to move. He watched as the man pulled back from Sera and looked down at her face. And Sera, his Sera who never cried, who had not cried at her own mother's funeral, who had stood beside Kayne through wars and exile and the deaths of packmates without a single tear. Sera was crying now. Silent tears, one after another, sliding down her face in the moonlight. The man with her lifted his hand and wiped one away. That was the moment Kayne's stillness ended. He stepped into the clearing. The sound of his footfall was soft. Alphas learn early to move without noise, but both of them felt it. Felt him. The air changed the way it always changed when Kayne entered a space. It got heavier. It got warmer. And it became very, very clear that something enormous and dangerous was now present. Sera turned first. Her eyes found him in the dark, and the expression on her face was not guilt. It was not fear. It was something he had never seen on her before, and he had spent 25 years studying her face. It was grief. Deep, exhausted, years-old grief. Like she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, and now that it had finally arrived, she was too tired to run from it anymore. The man beside her turned too. He was tall, not as tall as Kayne, but close. His hair was dark, his jaw was sharp, and his eyes were a color Kayne had never seen before, not brown, not gold, but somewhere in between, the way the forest looks just before the sun fully rises. He was not young, not old either. Somewhere in the middle, the way wolves sometimes looked when their agging had slowed. He was dressed plainly, no rank markings, no pack colors. A man who did not want to be identified, but Kayne did not need his clothes to tell him what he was. He could smell it. Every alpha could do this, could read another wolf's blood, rank, and lineage from a single breath of air. It was the oldest skill their kind possessed, older than speech, older than fire. And what Kayne's wolf was telling him right now was so impossible, so completely beyond what his mind could accept that he almost dismissed it. Almost. The man across the clearing was not just a wolf, he was alpha-blooded. Dominant. Powerful enough that Kayne's wolf, for the first time in 20 years, felt the shadow of a challenge. But it was the second thing, the deeper thing, the thing underneath the rank and the power that truly stopped the world. Kayne's wolf knew this man's blood, not from a rival pack, not from a border territory, not from any enemy or ally he had ever encountered. His wolf knew this man's blood the way you know a sound you heard once as a child and cannot name but cannot forget. Familiar in a way that defies explanation, familiar in a way that should not be possible, Kayne stared at the man and then he looked at Sera and she was still crying. Kayne, her voice was barely above a breath. She took one step toward him and then stopped as if something invisible had blocked her path. He said nothing. His voice had gone somewhere else entirely. Please, she whispered. I need you to let me explain. Man beside her said nothing. He had not looked away from Kayne since he turned. He was watching the Alpha the way you watch a storm, not with fear, but with the careful, steady attention of someone who knows exactly what a storm can do. Kayne looked at him again. And this time he let himself ask the question his wolf had already answered. This man's blood smelled like Sera's, and it smelled like his. The clearing tilted. Not physically, everything around him was perfectly still. But something inside Kayne's understanding of the world had shifted, like a door swinging open on a room he had never known existed. And through that open door the cold was rushing in. Who is he? Kayne asked. His voice came out very quiet. The quieter Kayne spoke, the more dangerous he was. Every wolf in his pack knew this. The warriors who had served under him for decades said that a whisper from Kayne was worth more fear than a roar from any other Alpha. Sera closed her eyes, one breath, two. When she opened them again, she looked directly at him, and what he saw in her eyes was not the answer to a small question. It was the answer to a question the size of a life. A question that had apparently existed for 25 years without him ever knowing to ask it. He is your son, she said. The forest heard it. The trees heard it. The moon, still full and relentless overhead, heard it. Kayne heard it, and then nothing made sense anymore. He had no son. He knew this with the certainty of a man who had longed for one. He and Sera had lost children too early in their bond, before they had ever taken a breath. After that, Sera had told him the healers said she could not carry again. He had grieved it. He had buried it. He had accepted it the way you accept the kind of loss that does not kill you but changes the shape of everything afterward. He had no son, but his wolf was not confused. His wolf had already accepted the truth before his mind caught up to it, because wolves do not argue with blood. Blood does not lie. Blood is the oldest language their kind speaks, and what his wolf was reading from the man across the clearing was saying the same word over and over again in every frequency, in every layer. Son. Son, son. 25 years, Kayne said, not a question, not an accusation, just the number placed in the air between them. Sera nodded. The rage that moved through Kayne then was not the cold kind anymore. It was the hot kind. The kind that burns from the inside. He felt it rise from his chest into his throat, felt his wolf pressing against his skin, felt the trembling in his hands that meant he was very close to losing control of the boundary between his human body and his wolf. He had not lost that control since he was 17 years old. He was pressing both fists against the outside of his thighs now, the knuckles whitening, and he was breathing through his nose in slow, forced intervals. The way his old trainer had taught him in the training grounds of his father's keep when he was barely old enough to hold his wolf at bay. In. Hold. Out. In. Hold. Out. The young man, his son, his mind whispered the impossible words again, had not moved. He was still watching Kayne with those strange amber forest eyes, and now that Kayne was looking more closely, he could see things he had not allowed himself to see before, the set of the jaw, the width of the shoulders. The way the young man stood, weight forward, spine straight, chin level, with the exact unconscious posture of a dominant wolf who has never been taught to make himself smaller for anyone. He stood the way Kayne stood. He breathed the way Kayne breathed. He watched the world the way Kayne watched it, not with suspicion, not with fear, but with the slow, patient attention of someone who knows that most things eventually reveal themselves if you give them enough time. Kayne turned his eyes back to Sera. Where, he said, and his voice was barely a sound, has he been? Sera's mouth opened, and before she could answer, before the next word of the next sentence of what he understood was going to be a very long, very devastating truth, a horn sounded from the direction of the pack hall. One long blast, then two short ones, the signal. Kayne knew it instantly. Every alpha-blooded wolf in the territory knew it. One long, two short. It was the oldest warning call in Blackwood history, passed down through generations without ever needing to be updated, because the thing it announced had not changed in 400 years. Enemy wolves. On Blackwood land, moving fast. The rage in Kayne's chest collided with the training in his blood, and the training won because it always won, because an alpha who lets his personal pain override his pack's survival is an alpha who buries his people, and Kayne had sworn on his coronation night that he would never be that man. He looked at Sera one final time. Do not move from this clearing, he said, and then his eyes moved to the young man who was, apparently, his son. Stay with her. Young man held his gaze. And then slowly he dipped his chin. Not in submission, not quite that, in acknowledgement, like a wolf who has not yet decided if this man is worth following but is willing for now to watch and see. Kayne turned and ran toward the hall. Behind him, the forest swallowed the clearing whole. And somewhere in the dark, something old and dangerous was moving through Blackwood Land. Something that knew somehow that the Alpha had just discovered the secret that had been kept from him for 25 years, and had chosen this exact moment, this precise crack in the kingdom's foundation, to arrive. That was not an accident. Nothing about tonight was an accident. The horn sounded again, louder now, more urgent, and Kayne ran faster, his wolf half surfaced beneath his skin, his mind splitting itself in two directions at once. Toward the enemy at the border and back, always back, to the woman standing in the moonlit clearing with a 25-year-old truth still warm on her lips. He did not know yet what he would do when he returned. He did not know yet if there was any version of this night that did not end in fire. But he knew one thing. He was going to need every answer she had, every single one. The hall was in chaos when Kayne arrived, not the loud, disorganized chaos of panicked wolves. His pack did not panic. He had trained that out of them years ago, but the tight, controlled chaos of warriors moving fast with purpose, pulling on gear, checking weapons, reading maps spread across the long stone table in the war room. Torches burned along every wall. The smell of iron and urgency was thick in the air. Marcus was already at the head of the table. Marcus had been Kayne's beater for 18 years. He was shorter than the Alpha by half a head, broader across the chest, with a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. A gift from a border skirmish 7 years back that he wore the way most wolves wore rank markings, with complete indifference to what anyone else thought about it. He was not a man who wasted words or movement, and when Kayne walked through the war room doors, Marcus looked up from the map and said exactly 4 words. Greywood, 20 wolves. Moving. Kayne crossed the room in 10 steps and looked at the map. The Blackwood territory was marked in deep red, an enormous stretch of ancient forest land, threaded through with rivers and ravines, bordered to the north by the Elder Ridge and to the south by the Ashford Marshes. In the east, where the forest thinned into open ground before the next pack's territory began, Marcus had placed 20 small stones in a rough arrow formation, all pointing inward, toward the heart of Blackwood Land. Long ago was the first sighting, Kayne asked. 40 minutes. Scouts caught the scent first, Greywood blood, no question. Then 3 scouts actually saw the wolves. Moving in formation, no pack colours, no declaration banner. No declaration banner, that was important. When one pack entered another's land for legitimate reasons, trade, treaty negotiation, emergency passage, they flew their pack banner. It was the oldest courtesy in territorial law. You announced yourself, you made yourself visible. You did not sneak. 20 wolves sneaking through Blackwood Land in the dark meant one of 2 things. Either they were scouts assessing for a future attack, or the attack had already begun and this was the opening move. Who leads them? Kayne asked. Marcus's expression shifted slightly. Not much. Marcus did not have an expressive face, but enough for Kayne to register it. We think it's Rail, Marcus said. The war room went a degree quieter. Rail was the Alpha of the Greywood pack. He was not the largest Alpha in the territory, not the oldest, not the one with the longest bloodline or the most warriors. But he was the most patient. He was the kind of enemy who did not attack because he was angry. He attacked because he had decided, after long and careful thought, that the moment was exactly right. He did not make mistakes. He did not overcommit. And he was never, in 17 years of leading Greywood, ever caught doing something without a reason, which meant that whatever was happening tonight was not spontaneous. Kayne looked at the map. He looked at the position of the stones. And then he looked up and said, "He's not here to fight." Marcus waited. If Rail wanted to fight, he would have come with 60 wolves, not 20. He would have hit the north perimeter where our patrol gaps are widest. He would not have let himself be seen by scouts. Kayne pressed one finger to the center of the map, directly over the location of the main pack hall. He's moving towards something. He wants to reach something before we push him back, Marcus asked. Kayne did not answer immediately. He was thinking. He was thinking about a clearing in the forest, a woman standing in moonlight, a young man with amber forest eyes who stood with the posture of an Alpha and carried blood that Kayne's wolf had recognized before his mind had even formed the question. He was thinking about timing, about the fact that this, all of this, was happening tonight of all nights. The night Sera's secret had finally, after 25 years, found its way into the open air. He was thinking that Rail was a patient man who did not do things without reason, and he was beginning to understand with a cold and growing certainty that the secret Sera had kept all these years had not stayed as secret as she believed. "Double the south and east patrols," Kayne said. "Pull the perimeter wolves in tighter. I want no gaps larger than 50 meters. Send 2 advance teams to intercept, but do not engage unless they strike first. I want prisoners, not bodies." Marcus nodded and began issuing orders. Kayne turned to the doorway. He needed to get back to the clearing. He needed to get back to Sera. But before he could take a step, one of the young warriors near the door, a wolf named Bren, barely 20, one of the fastest runners in the pack, raised his hand slightly. "Alpha," Bren said, "there is something else." Kayne turned. Bren looked uncomfortable. Discomfort in young warriors usually meant the news was the kind that the speaker was afraid to deliver, which usually meant it was the kind the Alpha most needed to hear. "One of the scouts who spotted the Greywood wolves," Bren said carefully, "reported that 2 of them were not moving with the main group. They had split off. He tracked them to the south clearing, the one near the Luna's herb garden." South clearing, the moonlit clearing, where Kayne had left Sera and the young man who was apparently his son 30 minutes ago. Kayne was out of the war room before Bren finished the sentence. He ran the way Alphas run when something they love is in danger, not fast, but with the kind of absolute committed speed that does not account for obstacles because it simply does not experience them as obstacles. Branches moved. Roots did not catch his feet. The forest, which had been his home since childhood, yielded to him the way it always did, parting and closing behind him like dark water. He reached the clearing in 4 minutes. It was empty. Not violently empty, nothing disturbed, no signs of struggle, no blood in the air. Just empty. The moonlight still fell in the same place. The grass was flattened in 2 spots where Sera and the young man had been standing. But they were gone. Kayne stood in the center of the clearing and breathed. He caught Sera's scent, her specific, irreplaceable combination of cedar and rain, and something beneath both that was purely, entirely her, moving south. He caught the young man's scent moving beside hers. And beneath both of them, layered faintly but unmistakably, he caught Greywood, 2 wolves. Moving carefully, staying downwind, they had been here. They had seen Sera and the young man. And then the scent trail told the story. Sera and the young man had moved, not in a panic, not running, walking deliberately in the direction of the old stone keep at the southern edge of Blackwood Land, the keep that had been Kayne's first home as a child before his father built the Great Hall. The keep that almost no one outside the core pack bloodline knew existed. Sera had taken the young man there. Which meant she knew they were being watched. Kayne exhaled slowly. There was so much about his mate that he was realizing in this single devastating night that he had never fully understood. She was smarter than he had given her credit for. No, that was not quite right. He had always known she was intelligent. What he had not known was how much of that intelligence she had been quietly, consistently, invisibly directing toward a purpose that had nothing to do with him. He followed the trail south. The old keep was a 40-minute walk through dense forest. Kayne covered it in 20. The stone walls emerged from the dark gradually, the way old things always reveal themselves, not all at once but in pieces, giving you time to prepare. The gate was shut but not locked. He pushed it open. Inside the courtyard, a single torch burned in a bracket near the inner door. Sera was sitting on the old stone bench beside the well. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was not crying anymore. She had the look of a woman who had finished a very long preparation for a very difficult conversation and had now arrived at the moment itself and was simply waiting for it to begin. The young man was standing a few feet away, leaning against the courtyard wall with his arms crossed. He looked up when Kayne entered. Those amber forest eyes, Kayne could see them more clearly now in the torchlight, were watchful and calm. Kayne closed the gate behind him. He looked at Sera. "Talk," he said. She nodded. "One breath," she began. "His name is Aldrich," she said. "He is 25 years old. He was born in the 3rd month of the year, 11 days after the last winter frost, in a small house on the eastern border of Blackwood Land that no longer exists." Kayne said nothing. He was listening the way he listened in battle, completely, with every part of himself, missing nothing. "When I discovered I was carrying him," Sera continued, "we had been mated for 3 months. You had just fought off the Ironville challenge. Your father was still alive. The pack was stable, but barely. There were 3 other packs watching Blackwood for weakness, waiting to move the moment they sensed any instability in the bloodline." She paused. "And your father called me to his chambers alone." Kayne went very still. His father, Alpha Kayne, dead now for 16 years. Powerful, brilliant, utterly uncompromising man who had ruled Blackwood for 37 years and left a pack that was feared across every territory it shared a border with. A man Kayne had loved and respected, and in the private spaces of his heart, feared in the particular way that sons fear fathers who never make room for softness. "He told me," Sera said, "that the child I was carrying had been tested." "Tested," Kayne repeated flatly. "He knew before I did. Had a healer examine me. Someone loyal to him, not to us. I did not know until he told me what had been found." She lifted her eyes fully to Kayne's for the first time since he had walked into the courtyard. "The child carried a double dominant alpha strain, Kayne. Both of us, both our bloodlines, carried a recessive dominant gene. When they combined, the child produced what the healer called a full-spectrum dominant, something that had not appeared in any recorded pack bloodline in over 200 years. Silence in the courtyard was absolute. Kane understood the significance of what she was describing before she explained it, because he was the son of a dominant alpha and had been educated from birth in the inheritance laws and bloodline politics of their world. A full-spectrum dominant was not merely a strong wolf. It was something older. Something that existed in the pack histories the way legends exist, referred to but not truly believed in, like a story told so many times that people forget it was ever real. A full-spectrum dominant could not be controlled by any alpha living. Their dominance was not learned or trained. It was innate, absolute and complete from birth. In ancient times, packs had gone to war over the birth of such a wolf. Bloodlines had been erased to prevent them from maturing. Because a full-spectrum dominant who reached adulthood and claimed their wolf was not just a threat to individual packs, they were a threat to the entire territorial balance that all packs depended on. And Kane's father had known this child was one. "He told you to get rid of the child," Kane said. Sera's jaw tightened. "He told me that if the child was born and raised in Blackwood, every enemy pack in the territory would know within a year. He said the child would be a target from the moment it drew its first breath. He said the only way to protect Blackwood and to protect you was to make sure the child was never officially born. Wanted you to end the pregnancy. You didn't." The first time since Kane had sat across from her in this conversation, something that was not grief or exhaustion moved across Sera's face. Something harder. Something that, if he had not known her as well as he did, he might have called defiance. "I could not," she said simply. Kane looked at her for a long moment. And then he looked at the young man against the wall, Aldrich, his son, 25 years old, standing in the torchlight of his father's childhood home with his arms crossed and his eyes calm and his spine absolutely straight. And looking, Kane realized with a sensation he had no name for, exactly like the kind of wolf that could bring an entire territorial balance to its knees without even trying. "Where did you go?" Kane asked. Not of Sera this time. Of Aldrich. The young man's eyes moved from the wall to his father's face. When he spoke, his voice was low and even, not aggressive, not deferential, but level in the way of someone who has chosen their words carefully before opening their mouth. "East," Aldrich said. "Beyond the Ashford border. There is a settlement of unmated wolves, no pack allegiance, no territory. My mother placed me with a family there. I have been there since I was 3 days old." 3 days, Kane repeated almost to himself. "Your father's men came on the 2nd day, Aldrich said. Looking for the child, my mother had already arranged the transfer." Kane turned back to Sera. "You were supposed to be recovering from a difficult birth. The healers told me, our healers, that the child had not survived." "Your father arranged that," Sera said. "He spoke to the healers himself. I was not given a choice in what they told you. You could have told me the truth." "I tried." Her voice did not waver, but her hands, folded in her lap, tightened against each other. 3 weeks after you were told the child died, I came to your study. I sat across from you at that same desk where you signed the pack declarations, and I opened my mouth to tell you everything." Kane remembered that conversation. He remembered it with the specific, unhappy clarity of memories attached to grief. He remembered Sera sitting across from him, pale and quiet, and he remembered that he had spoken first. He had told her he did not want to discuss the loss anymore. He had told her they needed to move forward. He had told her in the particular way that men tell women things when they are trying to outrun their own pain, that the best thing they could do for each other was to stop looking back. And Sera had closed her mouth, and she had nodded, and 25 years had passed. Kane sat down on the stone bench across from her. Not beside her, across from her. He sat down because his legs were making a decision that his pride had not yet signed off on, and they had apparently decided that this conversation was too heavy to have while standing. He sat for a moment in the quiet. The torchlight moved. An owl called from somewhere in the forest beyond the wall. "Greywood wolves tonight," Kane said finally. "Rail, he knows about Aldrich." Sera and Aldrich exchanged a glance. It was a small, quick glance, the kind that passes between two people who have discussed something at length and have been waiting for someone else to arrive at the same conclusion. "Yes," Sera said. "For how long?" "We believe," Aldrich said, "approximately 6 months." 6 months. Kane pressed both hands flat against his knees and breathed. 6 months. The patient Alpha of Greywood had known for 6 months that Blackwood's Alpha had a full-spectrum dominant son hidden beyond the eastern border, and for 6 months he had done nothing except, apparently, plan very carefully for exactly this moment. "He wants Aldrich," Kane said. "He wants control of what Aldrich represents," Aldrich corrected quietly. "There is a difference. Rail does not want me dead. A full-spectrum dominant who is dead is a political crisis. A full-spectrum dominant who is alive and allied with Greywood is something else entirely." "Wants to claim you before I can," Kane said. Aldrich met his father's eyes steadily. "Before you even knew I existed." Courtyard was very quiet. Somewhere beyond the wall, deep in the forest, something was moving. Multiple things, greywood wolves still out there, still circling. Patient and purposeful, the way their alpha had trained them to be. Kayne looked at his son, 25 years. His son had been alive for 25 years, growing up without a pack, without a father, without the protection of the Blackwood bloodline that was his birthright. Because Kayne's own father had decided that protection was not worth the danger, and because the woman Kayne had loved for his entire adult life had carried the weight of that decision alone rather than trust him with it. He did not know yet what he felt about that. He genuinely did not know. The feelings were all present. He could sense them the way you can sense weather before it arrives, that thickening of the air and change in pressure that tells you something is coming. The grief was there, the rage was there. The bewildering, disorienting tenderness of looking at a man you have never met and recognizing your own blood in him. It was all present, but none of it had fully landed yet. What had landed, what was sharp and clear and immediate, was the tactical reality pressing in on all sides. Rail was moving, his wolves were on Blackwood land, his reason was standing 10 feet away, and Kayne had a choice to make before morning about what kind of alpha he was going to be in response. He stood up. "You will stay inside the keep tonight," he said, to Sera, to Aldrich, both of them. "The gate will be guarded by 4 of my most senior warriors. You will not open it for anyone except me or Marcus. Do you understand?" Sera nodded. Aldrich looked at him for a moment. That steady, measuring look. And then slowly, deliberately, with the weight of a decision being made in real time, he nodded too. Kayne turned toward the gate. "Alpha," Aldrich said. Kayne stopped, turned slightly, just enough to see the young man from the corner of his eye. "Am not something to be won," Aldrich said. "Not by Rail, not by anyone." A pause, "including you." The words landed cleanly. Not as a threat. Aldrich had not raised his voice, had not changed his posture. Just as a statement of fact from a wolf who had spent 25 years answering to no one and had arrived at tonight with no intention of beginning. Kayne looked at him fully. And in his son's face, in the set of that jaw and the steadiness of those eyes, and the absolute immovable calm of a dominant wolf who has decided where he stands, Kayne saw something that was not a reflection exactly, but was very close to one. "Good," Kayne said, and he walked out into the dark. Behind him the gate closed, the forest closed. The night, vast and moonlit and full of moving shadows, closed around him like a hand, and somewhere ahead in the deep Blackwood trees, 20 greywood wolves were waiting. They had chosen the wrong night. They had walked into a territory whose alpha had just discovered he had a son, which meant they had walked into a territory whose alpha had something new and enormous and terrifying to protect. And Kayne, running now through the dark toward his warriors, his pack, his land, felt the grief and the rage and the bewilderment settle behind him like a cloak he would pick up later, and felt the thing that lived beneath all of it rise up instead. The thing that had kept Blackwood standing for 12 generations. The thing that enemies learned about always, exactly 1 moment too late. The first greywood wolf they caught was young. Too young, honestly, to be on a mission like this. Kayne could see it in the way the wolf held himself when Marcus's team dragged him into the torchlight of the Eastern Patrol station. The practiced stillness of someone trying very hard to look like they were not afraid, which is always the clearest possible sign that they are. He was maybe 19. Dark-haired, lean, with the kind of wiry muscle that comes from hard training rather than natural size. His pack markings were covered, dark paint smeared across the skin of his wrists where the greywood tattoos would normally be visible. His eyes were moving too fast, taking in the room, counting exits, assessing threats. Smart enough to do that, not experienced enough to do it without being noticed. Kayne pulled a chair to the center of the room and sat down directly in front of him. He did not speak immediately. This was something his father had taught him, one of the few lessons from that man he had kept without reservation. When you want the truth from someone, do not begin with questions. Begin with silence. Let the silence do the first work. Most people, given enough quiet and enough time in the presence of something they are afraid of, will start filling the space with words before you have asked for a single one. The young wolf lasted 40 seconds. "I was only tracking," he said. "I was not here to fight anyone." "I know," Kayne said. The wolf blinked. He had expected denial to be met with anger, not agreement. Agreement from an alpha you have just been caught spying on is deeply unsettling, and Kayne knew it. "No, you were tracking," Kayne continued. "I know Rail sent you. I know he sent 20 of you, which means this was not a scouting mission. Scouting missions use 4 wolves at most. This was a retrieval." He leaned forward slightly. "What I want to know is the exact instruction Rail gave you before you crossed my border." Young Wolf's eyes steadied. He was deciding. Kayne could watch the decision happening, loyalty to the pack that sent him versus the very reasonable self-preservation instinct of a 19-year-old who was sitting in the middle of enemy territory surrounded by warriors twice his size. "Find the unmated male," the wolf said finally. Bring him back to Rail, alive and undamaged. A pause. Those were the exact words. Alive and undamaged, Kayne repeated. Yes, Alpha, Kayne sat back. Alive and undamaged, not eliminate the threat, not prevent the bloodline from surfacing. Bring him back. Rail wanted Aldrich present and unharmed, which meant Rail wanted Aldrich functional, which meant Rail had already decided exactly what UC intended to make of a full-spectrum dominant wolf who had spent his entire life without pack allegiance. He was going to offer Aldrich a place in Greywood, not as a prisoner. As a recruit, as an asset. He was going to approach the son of the Blackwood Alpha with an outstretched hand and a speech about how Greywood had known about Aldrich's existence for years, had been watching over him quietly, had respected his autonomy, all of which were things Kayne had emphatically not done, because until tonight he had not known there was anything to do. Rail was going to walk into the gap between Aldrich and his father and make a home in it. Kayne stood up. Keep him comfortable, he told Marcus. Food, water, a warm space. He is a guest, not a prisoner. Release him at dawn and send him back across the eastern border. Young Wolf looked genuinely startled by this. Alpha, tell Rail, Kayne said, pausing at the door without turning around, that the male he is looking for is not available for retrieval. Tell him that if he has something to say to me, he knows where my hall is. Tell him he is welcome to visit, formally, with a banner. He left the patrol station and walked into the cold night air. Marcus followed him out a moment later, pulling the door shut behind him. They stood together in the dark the way they had stood together through 17 years of difficulty, side by side, facing outward, comfortable enough with each other that silence did not need filling. He is going to come, Marcus said after a moment. Yes, with more than 20 wolves. Yes, Kayne. Marcus very rarely used his Alpha's name without a title. When he did, it meant what followed was something he had weighed carefully before deciding to say. The warriors are confused. There are rumors spreading from the south clearing. Someone saw you there tonight and saw the Luna and saw a young male with her. The wolves are asking questions. Kayne had expected this. In a pack, information moved the way water moves, finding every crack, taking every path, impossible to fully contain once it had started flowing. What are they asking? Kayne said. The male is, why he was with the Luna, why you left the clearing the way you did. Marcus paused. A few of the older wolves, the ones who have been in this pack long enough to remember the early years of your mating bond, are starting to do the mathematics. The mathematics, 25 years, a young male, the Luna, the Alpha's reaction. They will have the answer before morning, Kayne said. There is no version of this that stays contained past sunrise. No, Marcus agreed. There is not. Another silence. The wind moved through the high branches above them, carrying the cold smell of deep forest and beneath it the faint residue of Greywood, a dozen different wolves who had walked through Blackwood land tonight and left the ghost of themselves in the air. Are you? Marcus asked. It was a simple question. From anyone else, Kayne might have deflected it. From Marcus, he gave it the respect of an honest moment. I do not know yet, he said. Marcus nodded. Fair. They stood a moment longer. Need to go back to the keep, Kayne said. There is more she needs to tell me. I stopped her too soon. Marcus said. I will manage the patrol rotations and keep the pack steady until morning. At dawn you call a full assembly and you address it yourself before the rumors finish building their own version of events. Kayne looked at his beater. You know what to say when warriors are afraid. I have had a good teacher, Marcus said simply. Kayne turned and walked back through the forest. The keep was quiet when he arrived. The 4 warriors he had posted at the gate stood aside without a word when they saw him coming. He pushed the gate open and stepped into the courtyard. The torch was lower now, an hour or 2 of burning had reduced it. In that amber, tired light, he saw that Sera had not moved from the stone bench. Aldrich was no longer against the wall. He was sitting on the ground a few feet from his mother, his back against the stone, his legs stretched out in front of him, and he appeared to be of all things asleep, or close to it. His eyes were shut, his breathing was slow and even, and his wolf was relaxed enough that the constant low-level vibration of a dominant wolf's defensive awareness had dropped to almost nothing. Which meant, somewhere in the past hour, this young man had decided that this courtyard was safe. That the wolves at the gate were trustworthy. That he could afford to let his guard down. Kayne stood and watched his son sleep for a moment. There was something about it that undid him in a way that nothing else tonight had managed. The rage, the grief, the tactical emergency, all of those he had been able to hold at arm's length, to manage, to fold into a shape that could be carried. But this, a young man asleep on the ground of his father's childhood home, long legs stretched out and face finally unguarded, looking for the first time like someone who might be tired, who might have been carrying something heavy for a long time and had only just been given a moment to set it down. This reached past every layer of composure Kayne had assembled over 47 years of living and touched something underneath all of it. He looked away. Sera was watching him. She had seen the whole thing. She said nothing, which was the right choice and one of the reasons, one of many, sitting heavy in his chest tonight, that he had always loved her. He crossed the courtyard and sat beside her on the bench, not across from her this time, beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Continue," he said quietly. She understood immediately. She had been waiting for this. She folded her hands in her lap again, that particular gesture she made when she was about to say something she had rehearsed many times and was now trusting herself to deliver without the rehearsal failing her. "After your father arranged the story for the pack healers," she said, "he came to me one final time. He told me that the arrangement was complete, that Aldrich was placed, that the family beyond the Ashford border was trusted, that the child would be cared for." She paused. "He also told me that if I ever told you, he would have the child found and dealt with." The words landed in the quiet courtyard like a stone dropped into still water. Dealt with. Kayne did not move. He was not a cruel man, Sera said, and the care she took to say this fairly, without venom, even now told Kayne more about her than almost anything else she had said tonight. He was a man who believed the pack came first, before everything, before individuals, before children. Before, she stopped, steadied, before fathers who deserved to know. "Threatened the child's life to keep you silent," Kayne said. "Yes, you believed he would follow through." "I did," Sera said without hesitation. "Because I knew your father. I knew what he was capable of when he decided that something was a threat to this pack. He did not make empty threats, he never had." "And Aldrich," she glanced toward the sleeping young man, and something crossed her face that was so deep and so old it had no surface expression that quite matched it. "Aldrich was 3 days old. 3 days. I had held him for 3 days and then given him to strangers, and your father was standing in front of me telling me what would happen if I spoke. And I believed him, because I had to." Kayne was quiet for a long time. He was assembling something in his mind, not a rebuttal, not a defense, but an understanding. The shape of a 25-year silence. The architecture of it. The specific way a threat made against a 3-day-old child could become a wall that a woman carried inside her for a quarter of a century, invisible to everyone around her, including the man who slept beside her every night. He thought about all the times he had looked at Sera across the dinner table or in the war room or lying in the dark before sleep, and had felt the particular sensation, which he had always dismissed as imagination or projection, that she was carrying something just out of his reach. Something just below the surface of every conversation they had ever had. He had told himself it was grief. The grief of the children they had lost. He had told himself it was just the weight of being a Luna, the responsibilities, the management of the pack's social fabric, the quiet, endless work of keeping a community of dominant wolves from turning their aggression inward. He had never once allowed himself to believe it might be a secret, because believing that would have meant acknowledging that the woman he trusted most in the world was keeping something from him. And that was an acknowledgement he had, apparently, been unwilling to make. There was a question in that unwillingness that he did not want to look at tonight. He filed it away for later with the careful, deliberate precision of a man who knows his own limits. "When did he come back?" Kayne asked, meaning Aldrich. "He found me," Sera said. 3 months ago. The family that raised him told him the truth when he turned 25. They had instructions to wait until then. He came east to the border and sent a message through one of the unmated wolves who trades between territories." She looked down at her hands. He did not know what he would find. He did not know if his mother was alive. He did not know if his father knew he existed or had chosen to abandon him. Kayne closed his eyes briefly. "He believed, for most of his life, that you had decided not to keep him," Sera said. She said it gently, but she said it fully because it needed to be said fully, and she was not a woman who shied away from necessary pain. The family that raised him did not know the full truth. They knew the child came from a powerful bloodline and needed protection. They did not know you did not know. The specific weight of that settled over Kayne like something physical. His son had grown up believing his father had made a choice. Had looked at the child the moon had given him, and decided that child was too dangerous, too complicated, too costly, and had chosen the pack over the blood. Kayne had done no such thing, but Aldrich had spent 25 years living inside the belief that he had. And a belief you live inside for 25 years does not simply dissolve when the truth arrives. It becomes part of the structure, part of the walls and floors of who you are. You can know the truth and still feel the old belief in your bones long after your mind has moved on. Kayne opened his eyes and looked at his son again. Aldrich was awake. He had woken at some point in the past few minutes, silently, the way dominant wolves always wake, with no transition between sleep and full alertness, and was watching Kayne from across the courtyard with those steady amber forest eyes. Kayne did not know how much he had heard, probably enough. The hearing of a full-spectrum dominant would be sharper than anything Kayne possessed, They looked at each other in the low torchlight. There was so much in that look. So many years of absence. So many years of a wrong story told to a child who had no way of knowing it was wrong. So many years of Kayne going about the business of being an alpha, fighting and ruling and protecting and building, while across the eastern border, past the Ashford marshes, in a settlement of unmated wolves with no allegiance to anyone, a boy who carried his blood was growing up without him. Kayne did not look away. Aldrich did not look away. And then Kayne said quietly to his son across the amberlit courtyard, the only thing that was true enough to be worth saying at this moment. I did not know. 3 words, small ones, the kind that carry enormous weight precisely because of their smallness. Aldrich held his gaze for a long moment. His expression did not change dramatically. He was not a dramatically expressive young man, which was another thing he had apparently inherited, and Kayne felt an absurd, untimely flicker of something that might have been recognition. But something in the quality of the stillness around him shifted. A degree of tension that had been present since Kayne first walked into this courtyard, so constant and so carefully maintained that it had become invisible, released slightly. Not forgiveness. Not yet. That would take a great deal longer than one conversation in a torchlit courtyard, and Kayne was not foolish enough to expect otherwise, but something. The beginning of a line being drawn between what had happened and what might happen next. Before anyone could speak again, Marcus's voice came over the pack communication link, the low, directed frequency that beaters used to reach their alphas across distance, a skill that took years to develop and could only be heard by the intended recipient. Kayne. Marcus's voice was controlled, but beneath the control was something tight. Rail is at the north gate, alone, no warriors. He is requesting formal entry under the banner of council mediation. Council mediation. The words landed in Kayne's chest like ice. Council mediation was an ancient provision, one of the oldest laws in pack governance, established in the time of the founding alphas. It allowed any alpha to request neutral ground arbitration when a territorial dispute had the potential to escalate to interpack war. The council, a body of elder wolves from unaligned bloodlines, would be invoked as witnesses and adjudicators. Both alphas would be required to present their claims. The council's judgment would be binding under the oldest laws of their kind, but the provision had another clause. One that was rarely invoked because it was so extreme. If the dispute involved a wolf of full-spectrum dominant bloodline, a wolf whose existence had the potential to disrupt the balance of multiple territories simultaneously, then the council did not merely mediate. The council claimed temporary custodial authority over the wolf in question until a judgment was reached. Rail had come alone, under a banner that no alpha could legally refuse without forfeiting their standing under pack law, requesting council mediation in a dispute that involved a full-spectrum dominant. He was not retrieving Aldrich by force. He was going to make the council do it for him. Kayne stood up from the bench. The courtyard, the torch, the tired quiet of the past hour, all of it sharpened into the kind of absolute clarity that danger produces in people who have learned to use it. He looked at Sera. You knew this was the play he was planning. Sera met his eyes. I suspected. Rail is patient. He would not move without a mechanism that was airtight. Kayne looked at Aldrich, who was fully upright now, arms uncrossed, every degree of that watchful alpha awareness back in place. If the council is convened, Aldrich said, they take custody of me. Temporarily, Kayne said. Long enough, Aldrich replied, for Rail to make his case. Long enough for him to present whatever evidence he has gathered about my bloodline, my capabilities, my history of living without pack allegiance. Long enough for him to argue that Blackwood failed its responsibility to its own blood and that Greywood stepped into that gap. He paused. Long enough to make the case that I belong to whoever can best protect and direct what I am. Courtyard was very quiet. Outside the walls, the forest stretched for miles in every direction. Out at the north gate, a patient, intelligent enemy was standing alone under a legal banner that had just redrawn the entire battlefield, not with warriors, with law. Kayne looked at his son. You fight? Kayne asked. Aldrich blinked once. I have been fighting my entire life. I mean your wolf, Kayne said. Have you shifted? Do you have control of the shift? Something moved through Aldrich's expression, complex, layered, a history in a single face. My wolf surfaced for the first time when I was 4. I have been shifting since I was 7. I have full control. A pause, more than full. Kayne nodded slowly. He was thinking. He was thinking very fast, the way he thought in the final moments before a battle when all the pieces were visible and the decision was the only thing standing between the situation and its outcome. Rail had come under a council banner. That banner was legitimate. Refusing it outright would be a violation of pack law, one that would itself be grounds for council intervention, and would make Kayne look precisely like the kind of unstable, self-interested alpha who could not be trusted with a full-spectrum dominant. But the council mediation provision had an internal clause that most alphas had never needed to understand, because most alphas had never faced a situation that required it. The custodial authority of the council could be forestalled by one thing, and one thing only: a formal witness declaration of bloodline claim. If an alpha before the council was convened, formally and publicly claimed a full-spectrum dominant as blood, not as a packmate, not as an ally, but as blood, with the ancient declaration spoken aloud before witnesses of standing, then the council's custodial authority could not supersede the bloodline claim. The dominant wolf could not be taken into temporary custody because the bloodline itself had been formally acknowledged and was therefore under the protection of all the laws that governed pack inheritance. Rael had come alone. He had no witnesses present, and Kayne had 4 senior warriors at the gate, a beater within communication reach, and a courtyard with 2 other living souls in it. He turned to Sera. "Are you willing to stand as witness?" Sera looked at him, and for a single breath every layer of the past 25 years, the grief and the silence and the impossible weight of the choice that had been forced on her, was fully visible in her face. And then she nodded. Once, solidly, Kayne turned to Aldrich. Aldrich was watching him, that steady, measuring, give-nothing-away watch. "This is not an attempt to own you," Kayne said. "I told you I heard what you said earlier. I'm not trying to be Rael with different packaging. This declaration protects you under bloodline law. It prevents the council from taking temporary custody and handing Rael a 6-week window to make his case while you have no standing to refuse." He paused. "After that, what you do is your choice. Where you go, what pack you align with, or whether you align with any, that is your decision. But tonight this is the legal mechanism that keeps you out of Rael's hands." Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. The torch flickered. The owl in the forest called again, the same one or a different one, it was impossible to know. "The declaration," Aldrich said finally. Kayne stood straight. He spoke the ancient words, the ones written into pack law before written language had properly existed, passed through 12 generations of his bloodline by voice and memory. The formal declaration of blood claim that had not been spoken in the Blackwood line since his own grandfather had declared his father. "Before these witnesses, under moon and forest and the laws of our first blood, I claim this wolf as my own. Bone of my bone, blood of my blood, standing in my line and under my protection now and in all the days that follow. Let any who challenge this claim answer to the blood that speaks it." His voice carried through the quiet courtyard. The warriors at the gate heard it. Sera heard it. The forest heard it. Aldrich stood in the torchlight and received it, not with emotion, not with the kind of dramatic visible response that the moment might have invited, but with that quality of stillness that Kayne was beginning to understand was not blankness. It was depth. It was the particular stillness of a person who feels things enormously and has learned, through 25 years of necessity, to keep the feeling very far below the surface. Kayne held his son's gaze. "Now," he said, "let us go deal with Rael." They walked out of the keep together, the alpha and the son he had not known existed until 2 hours ago, and behind them, moving quietly and with her chin level, came the Luna who had carried the secret that nearly broke everything. And at the north gate of Blackwood Land, a patient, calculating alpha was about to discover that the window he had spent 6 months preparing for had closed, not because Kayne had outfought him, because Kayne had outrun him. By exactly 4 words of ancient declaration. Hey, if you have made it this far, then you already know this story has got you. Don't even try to deny it. This channel is where stories like this live. Stories that pull you in from the very first second and don't let go until the very last word. Alpha wolves, forbidden secrets, ancient bloodlines, and the kind of love that survives 25 years of silence and still burns like it was lit yesterday. If this is your kind of story, and clearly it is, then hit that subscribe button right now, because we drop new stories regularly, and you do not want to be the person who misses the next one. Share this with someone who needs a good story tonight. Drop a comment and tell me whose side are you on right now, Kayne's, Sera's or Aldrich's, because that answer says a lot about you. Let's keep going. Rael was exactly what Kayne had expected. That was the first thing Kayne noticed when he came through the north gate and saw the Greywood Alpha standing in the narrow strip of open ground between the forest edge and the Blackwood boundary wall. He had expected someone who looked like Patience, and Rael did. He was tall but not imposing, lean but not slight. His hair was silver at the temples despite being no older than Kayne, and his face had the particular quality of a man who has spent decades making careful decisions and has not yet made one he regretted. He wore no weapons visibly. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and his weight evenly distributed, and he watched Kayne approach with the calm expression of someone who had already played this conversation through to its conclusion and was simply waiting for reality to catch up. He was alone as promised. He held the council banner, a narrow strip of white and grey fabric on a short staff, the universal signal of mediation request, in his left hand, low, almost casual. Not brandishing it. Simply carrying it. The way you carry something you know you will not need to fight over. His eyes moved to Aldrich the moment Aldrich came through the gate. Something happened in Rael's expression when he saw Aldrich, something that was gone almost instantly, too fast for most wolves to catch. But Kayne had spent a lifetime reading opponents, and what he caught in that fraction of a second was not what he expected. It was not greed. It was not the satisfaction of a plan reaching completion. It was recognition. Rael knew Aldrich, not knew of him, knew him, had seen his face before. Had been in the same space as this young man at some point in the past 6 months, and was not startled by his presence in the way that a man would be startled if the subject of a long-distance intelligence operation suddenly appeared in front of him. Kayne filed that away immediately behind his eyes, where he filed things that needed more thought than the present moment allowed. Rael transferred his gaze back to Kayne. He dipped his chin, the formal greeting between alphas of equal territorial standing. Kayne returned it. Kayne, Rael said. His voice was even, unhurried, and pleasant in the way that well-maintained weapons are sometimes pleasant, clean, precise, and entirely purposeful. Rael, Kayne said, you have crossed my border tonight with 20 wolves. You have sent 2 of those wolves into the South Territory. And now you are standing at my gate with a council banner at. Kayne glanced at the position of the moon, 2 hours past midnight. I have, Rael said without any defensiveness whatsoever. The border crossing was unauthorized and I take responsibility for it. My wolves have been recalled and are beyond your eastern perimeter as of 40 minutes ago. They were recalled when my patrol caught one of them, Kayne said. Rael accepted this without blinking. Yes, the timing is not ideal and the approach was not the one I would have chosen if circumstances had not required speed. I apologize for the breach. I am prepared to pay the standard territorial penalty. Kayne studied him. An alpha who apologized readily and offered to pay penalties before being asked was an alpha who had decided that this particular battle was not worth fighting, because he had already identified the battle that was worth fighting, and he was not going to waste energy on anything else. You are requesting council mediation, Kayne said. I am. What grounds? Rael's eyes moved briefly, deliberately to Aldrich, then back to Kayne. On the grounds that a full-spectrum dominant wolf has existed within the broader territorial boundaries for 25 years without formal pack registration, without bloodline acknowledgement, and without the council's knowledge. Under founding law, that constitutes an unregistered dominant, a category that triggers automatic council oversight regardless of individual pack claims. He said it the way someone recites something they have memorized not because they needed to memorize it, but because they wanted to be certain they had it exactly right. Every word was placed with the care of a man who understood that legal declarations can be invalidated by a single imprecise syllable. The warriors behind Kayne were very still. Kayne let the silence sit for 3 full seconds before he spoke. He did not look at Aldrich. He did not look at Sera, who had come through the gate and was standing slightly to his left. He kept his eyes on Rael, and he kept his voice at the same measured, pleasant register that Rael had been using, because matching someone's tone is one of the most effective ways of telling them that you are not afraid of them. Wolf you are referring to, Kayne said, was formally claimed under bloodline declaration 18 minutes ago, before witnesses of standing. In the ancestral keep of the Blackwood Alpha line. He paused. He is not an unregistered dominant, he is my son, declared blood of the Blackwood line under the protection of bloodline law, which as you know supersedes council custodial authority in all cases of formally acknowledged inheritance. He watched Rael receive this. To the man's considerable credit, his expression did not collapse. It adjusted. Like a structure that has taken a hit and is redistributing weight to compensate, visible to an engineer, invisible to anyone who is not looking very carefully. But Kayne was always looking very carefully. Declaration was made tonight, Rael said. After 25 years of non-acknowledgement. The declaration was made the moment the Alpha of the Blackwood line became aware that acknowledgement was required, Kayne said. Bloodline law does not penalize a father for a secret that was kept from him. It requires only that the declaration be made before council proceedings are formally opened, which it was. Another silence. Longer this time. Rael looked at Aldrich again, and this time Kayne let him look because Aldrich was not shrinking from it. He was standing exactly where he had been standing since they came through the gate, with his arms at his sides and his eyes level, meeting Rael's gaze with the flat, patient attention of a wolf who has already made a decision and is simply waiting for the other party to understand it. Aldrich, Rael said. It landed strangely. The use of the name, easy, familiar, too natural for a man who was supposed to have only intelligence-level knowledge of this person. You know each other, Kayne said. Not a question, Rael looked back at him. He made the calculation, Kayne could see him making it, of whether denial was worth attempting against an Alpha who had clearly already registered the recognition response. He decided it was not. We have met, Rael said carefully. On one occasion, in a neutral settlement east of the Ashford border. 6 months ago, Kayne said. Rael did not confirm or deny the timing. Kayne turned to look at his son. Aldrich's expression had not changed. But the quality of his stillness had become the particular kind of stillness that is not calm, but is the thing that sits directly below calm, pressing up against the underside of it. You knew who he was, Kayne said to Aldrich, when he came to the settlement. Aldrich held his father's gaze. He told me who he was. He told me he had known about my bloodline for years. He told me that Blackwood had made no move to find me or acknowledge me, and that he could offer, a slight pause, an alternative. You came here tonight, Kayne said. I came here tonight, Aldrich said, because I wanted to see for myself whether the story I had been told about my father was true. The amber forest eyes were steady. It took me 3 months to decide to come, and when I arrived I did not go to the hall, I did not announce myself. I found my mother first because she was the one who had made the actual choice, not a faceless Alpha I had never met. I wanted to understand her before I made any decision about you. Courtyard, the gate, the strip of open ground, all of it was very quiet. Kayne took all of this in. He took in the 3 months of deliberation, the careful choice to approach Sera first. The intelligence behind the sequence, understanding that Sera's version of events would be more honest, more emotionally accessible, less filtered through the politics of Alpha pride than anything Kayne might present if approached directly. His son had walked into this situation the way a strategist walks into a battlefield, assessing, gathering information, refusing to commit until he had enough ground truth to make a decision that would hold. Kayne was not sure whether to be proud or concerned that Aldrich had learned this particular skill so thoroughly. He settled on both. And what did you decide? Kayne asked. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. I decided to stay long enough to find out if you were worth deciding about. Behind Kayne he heard Marcus, who had arrived silently at some point in the past few minutes, because Marcus always arrived silently, make a sound that was almost, not quite, suppressed amusement. Kayne turned back to Rael. The Greywood Alpha was watching all of this with the expression of a man who had come to collect something, and was watching it become increasingly unavailable without a single hand being raised against him. His council banner was still in his left hand. He had not moved it. He had not lowered it. He was still technically within his rights to formally open mediation proceedings. The bloodline declaration forestalled the custodial provision, but it did not end the mediation request itself. Rael could still invoke the council. He simply could no longer use it as a mechanism to take Aldrich away from Blackwood land before a judgment was reached, which meant the council, if invoked, would now do something different. It would investigate. It would look at the circumstances of Aldrich's birth and concealment. It would look at the role of Kayne's father. It would look at Rael's unauthorized border crossing. It would look at the meeting in the eastern settlement, an Alpha from one territory making contact with the unregistered bloodline heir of another territory's Alpha without disclosure. That was not illegal under pack law, but it was the kind of thing that councils looked at very carefully, with very uncharitable eyes. Kayne could see Rael doing this same calculation, could see him arriving at the same answer. A council investigation at this point was not Rael's friend. You should know, Kayne said, keeping his voice easy, that I have no objection to the council being informed of this situation. I intend to register the bloodline declaration formally at the next council session regardless. Full documentation, complete history. He let that sit for exactly 1 second. Including the circumstances of the Eastern Settlement meeting and the nature of the conversation that took place there. Rael looked at him. Have no secrets to keep from the council, Kayne continued. Do you? The silence stretched. The moon had shifted, it was lower now, past its peak, beginning its slow descent toward the western treeline. In a few hours it would be dawn. Rael lowered the council banner, not dramatically. Not in surrender, the man was far too controlled for anything that visible. He simply lowered it slowly to hang at his side. A flag that was being held in reserve rather than planted. Declaration stands, he said. A statement of fact, not a concession. Rael did not concede things, he recalibrated. It does, Kayne agreed, another moment. Rael's eyes moved one final time to Aldrich. And in that look, Kayne saw something he had not expected, something that complicated the clean shape of enemy and threat that he had been building around this man all evening. It was not malice, it was not calculation. It was something that looked uncomfortably like genuine regard. Whatever had passed between Rael and Aldrich in that eastern settlement 6 months ago, it had not been purely political. Kayne noted this and put it away carefully for a later conversation. "I will be in touch through formal channels," Rael said to Kayne. And then, without asking permission, he looked at Aldrich one final time and said simply, "The offer remains open." Aldrich said nothing. Rael turned and walked back into the dark forest, alone exactly as he had arrived. The warriors at the gate watched him go. Marcus came to stand beside Kayne. Sera moved slightly closer. Aldrich remained where he was, watching the space where Rael had been standing. "What offer?" Kayne asked his son. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. "A place in Greywood, formal rank, a role in the pack's leadership structure." A pause, and answers. "He said he had information about my bloodline, about why the full-spectrum dominant strain appeared in me, that went beyond what any healer had told my mother." Kayne looked at Sera. Sera's face had gone very carefully neutral, which meant she was not surprised by this, which meant she had known Rael had made an offer and had chosen not to mention it yet. Another layer, another piece of what she had been carrying. He would deal with that later. Right now there was something more immediate. "What kind of information?" Kayne asked Aldrich. "He said the full-spectrum strain did not emerge by accident," Aldrich said. "He said it was cultivated, deliberately, that someone a long time ago, before either of our bloodlines were what they are now, made a choice about which wolves would mate and produce which children, and that choice was the beginning of a line that was always going to produce what I am." He turned to look at his father. He said the Blackwood line and one other were selected. "Engineered" was the word he used. Open ground by the gate was very still. "Engineered by whom?" Kayne asked. "That," Aldrich said, "is what he was offering to tell me." Kayne stood in the pre-dawn dark and felt the ground shift beneath this situation in a way it had not shifted all evening. Everything tonight had been enormous: the revelation of a son, the 25-year secret, Rael's legal maneuver, the bloodline declaration. All of it had been enormous. But all of it had been on some level about the past. About things that had already happened and were now simply being uncovered. What Aldrich had just described was different. If Rael's claim was true, if the full-spectrum dominant strain was not a biological accident but a deliberate outcome of engineered bloodlines, then the question was not about what had happened 25 years ago. The question was about why, and who, and what they had intended the outcome to be. And suddenly the fact that Rael had known about Aldrich for 6 months, had found the young man before Kayne had ever known to look, felt less like the patient strategy of an opportunistic rival Alpha and more like the behavior of a man who had been looking for something specific and had found it. Kayne turned to Marcus. "Pull every bloodline record we have, going back as far as the archive reaches. Tonight." Marcus did not ask why. He simply turned and went. Kayne looked at his son. And then he looked at his mate. And then he looked at the dark sky above the treeline, where the moon was descending and the first faint suggestion of grey was beginning to dilute the black at the eastern edge. In a few hours, the pack would assemble. He would stand before them and speak the truth, all of it, or as much of it as he currently possessed, about the son who had existed for 25 years beyond the Ashford border. He would speak the bloodline declaration publicly, with the full pack as witness, which would make it permanent and unassailable under every law their world recognized. And then he would begin the work of understanding what exactly his bloodline had been built to produce. He looked at Aldrich one more time. His son met his eyes. In the growing grey of pre-dawn, Aldrich looked younger than he had looked in torchlight, or maybe just less armored. The 25 years of careful independence, the long discipline of needing no one, the habit of self-sufficiency that had kept him alive and whole in a settlement of unmated wolves with no bloodline to shelter him. All of that was still there, fully intact. But underneath it, in the grey light, Kayne could see the outlines of something else. A young man who had come east across the Ashford border with no certainty of what he would find, driven by a question he had carried for 25 years. The same question, Kayne realized, that he himself was now carrying. Who am I, really? And what was I made for? They stood together in the lightning dark, father and son, separated by a lifetime and connected by blood, both of them looking at a horizon that was beginning to show its first edge of color. "You should rest," Kayne said. "The pack assembly is at dawn. I will need you present." Aldrich raised an eyebrow slightly. "You will need me present." "You are Blackwood blood," Kayne said. "Declared and witnessed. The pack needs to see that." He paused. "And you need to see them. They are your people, whether you have decided that yet or not." Aldrich looked at him for a long moment. That measuring, careful, give-nothing-away look that Kayne was beginning to think he would spend the rest of his life learning to read. And then, very slightly, so slightly it could almost be missed, the corner of Aldrich's mouth moved, not quite a smile. The preliminary sketch of one. The kind of expression that has decided to exist but has not yet committed to being visible. Kayne felt something in his chest that he had no name for and did not try to name. He turned toward the hall and began walking. Behind him, after a moment, he heard 2 sets of footsteps follow. Sera's quiet, familiar, the footfall he had known for 25 years. And Aldrich's a half-beat different, the stride slightly longer, the weight forward in that way that dominant wolves carry themselves. The way Kayne himself walked, the sky was turning. The forest was waking. And somewhere in the Blackwood archive, the answer to a question older than any of them was waiting in the bloodline records of 12 generations. But first, dawn, and the pack, and the truth spoken aloud in the open air where it had always needed to be. The pack assembly ground was a wide circle of flat earth at the centre of Blackwood land. It had been there longer than the hall. Longer than the keep. Longer than any structure the Blackwood line had ever built. It was the oldest part of the territory, just open ground, ringed by ancient trees so tall their canopies met overhead and made a ceiling of leaves and branches that let the light through in pieces, in shifting golden fragments that moved across the earth like something alive. There was a raised platform of dark stone at the northern edge, where the Alpha stood to address the pack. The stone was worn smooth in the centre from generations of feet standing in the same spot, and it had no ornamentation, no carving, no marking of any kind. The Blackwood Alphas had always believed that a leader's words should carry themselves. Kayne stood on that stone now. Below him, spread across the assembly ground in the grey-gold light of early morning, was his pack, 237 wolves. All ages, all ranks, from the senior warriors who had fought under his father before they fought under him, to the youngest cubs who had been brought by their parents and were now peering around adult legs with wide, curious eyes that did not yet understand the weight of what they were witnessing. They had come quickly when the assembly call went out. Blackwood wolves always came quickly, because they had been taught since childhood that when the Alpha called the pack together at unusual hours, something significant was happening, and significant things required presence. They were quiet. Unusually quiet for a crowd of this size, because they could already feel it. Packs feel their Alpha's emotional state the way a body feels a change in temperature, not through reasoning, not through observation, but through the oldest sensory channel their kind possessed. The bond between an Alpha and pack was not symbolic. It was biological, ancient, woven into the same layer of their nature as the wolf itself. And what the Blackwood pack was feeling from their Alpha this morning was something they had never felt from him before, not fear, not rage, not grief. Something that contained all three of those and was larger than any of them. Kayne looked out at their faces and thought, not for the first time, but more clearly than ever before, about what it meant to be the person these 237 wolves had built their safety around. He thought about the specific weight of being trusted that completely, about the responsibility of being the thing between your people and the dark. And he thought about what it meant to have kept them in the dark about something this significant, even unknowingly. Because even though he had not known, even though the secret had been kept from him as thoroughly as it had been kept from anyone, he was still their Alpha. The pack's integrity was his integrity. The truth was his truth to tell, regardless of who had originally buried it. He let the silence hold for one more moment, then he spoke. 25 years ago, he said, my mate carried a child. Assembly ground did not make a sound. That child was born, he survived, he was hidden under circumstances I will explain fully, and I was told he had not lived. Kayne's voice was level, not loud, he did not need volume, his voice carried naturally across the assembly ground, always had, but clear and unhurried, each word placed deliberately. I did not know my son was alive until last night. Silence changed quality. It became the particular silence of 237 wolves absorbing something enormous and trying to hold themselves still while they did it. His name is Aldrich. He is 25 years old. I declared him blood of the Blackwood line last night before witnesses under the ancestral declaration. That declaration stands and is permanent. Kayne paused. He is here. He looked to his left. Aldrich was standing at the edge of the platform, slightly behind and below the stone, in the place where a ranked wolf stands when they are being presented to a pack, but have not yet taken a formal position within it. He had not been given specific instructions about how to stand or what expression to wear. He did not need them. He stood the way he always stood, straight, weight forward, chin level, eyes moving across the assembled pack with a slow, assessing calm that was, Kayne noted, producing a visible effect on the wolves closest to the front. The dominant wolves in the pack, the warriors, the senior ranked members, were responding to Aldrich's presence the way submissive water responds to a stone dropped into it. Subtly, instinctively, without any of them fully understanding why. A degree of deference in the angle of shoulders. Eyes that met Aldrich's and then dropped slightly, not in submission exactly, but in the involuntary acknowledgement that dominant wolves make when they encounter something more dominant than themselves. A full-spectrum dominant, in the presence of a pack for the first time. Kane watched it happen across the assembly ground like a slow wave moving through a field of tall grass. Some of the wolves felt it immediately, the senior warriors, the ranked females, the older pack members whose instincts had been sharpened by decades. Others felt it a moment later, catching it from the reaction of those around them. And some, the youngest ones, the cubs, simply stared at Aldrich with the uncomplicated attention of those who have not yet learned to manage what they feel. Aldrich stood through all of it without moving. His expression did not change. He did not lean into the effect he was having. He did not pull back from it either. He simply existed in it, the way a fire simply exists in the space it occupies, not performing, not diminishing, just being precisely what it is. Kane turned back to the pack. "I will tell you everything," he said. "Not a selected version, not a managed account. Everything I know and everything I learned last night, because you deserve the full truth, and I will not begin this morning by giving you anything less." He took a steady breath. "My son's existence was concealed by my father Alpha Kayne at the time of Aldrich's birth. My father believed the concealment was necessary for the protection of this pack. He was wrong. The decision he made belonged to me and to my mate, and it was taken from us. I cannot undo that. But I can stand here now and ensure that nothing else in this pack's history is decided by fear rather than truth." A sound moved through the crowd. Not words, a collective exhale, a shift of breath. The sound a pack makes when its alpha says something that reaches past rank and governance and touches the thing underneath, the loyalty that is not performed but felt. An older warrior near the front, a wolf named Cole, grey-muzzled now, who had served under both Dren and Kane, raised his head and met Kane's eyes. In Cole's face was the expression of a wolf doing the quiet mathematics of memory, fitting a new truth into an old framework, checking whether the structure still held. After a moment he dipped his chin, a slow, deliberate acknowledgement. Not of Kane's authority, Cole had always acknowledged that. Of Kane's honesty. There is a difference, and old wolves always know which one they are giving. Others followed. One by one and then in clusters. Kane waited until the movement had passed through the crowd fully, then he continued. "Last night 20 Greywood wolves entered our territory without declaration. They have been returned across the border. The Alpha of Greywood came to our north gate requesting council mediation, which he has since withdrawn." He kept his voice steady on the next part. "Rail of Greywood has known about my son for 6 months. He has had contact with Aldrich in that time. His intention was to bring Aldrich under Greywood influence before Blackwood was aware of his existence. That attempt has failed." A pause. "We should all understand clearly that it may not be the last attempt. Aldrich's bloodline makes him significant in ways that extend beyond this pack, and there are those in the wider territory who will see him as something to be acquired rather than someone to be known. We will address every such attempt the same way we address all threats to our own blood. Directly and completely." He looked out at his pack. "Are there questions?" In a pack assembly, questions from the floor were rare. Most alphas did not invite them. Kane always did, because he had decided early in his leadership that a pack that could not ask its alpha questions was a pack that had learned to manage its alpha rather than trust him, and he had no interest in being managed. A female warrior near the middle of the crowd raised her hand. Her name was Dina, sharp, experienced, one of the best trackers Blackwood had. "Alpha, the bloodline declaration, has it been sent to the council registry yet? It will be dispatched by formal messenger this morning," Kane said, "before Rail can file any counterclaim." "Yes." Dina nodded and lowered her hand. An older female, a pack healer named Bess, raised hers next. "Alpha, the young male's bloodline, the full spectrum dominant. Does the pack need to understand what that means for our territory? For our relationships with neighboring packs?" Kane was quiet for a moment. This was the question he had expected and had prepared for, and also the question he was least certain how to answer completely, because the full answer involved things he did not yet know. The conversation with Aldrich about Rail's claim, about engineered bloodlines, deliberate cultivation, a choice made long ago that was always going to produce this outcome, was sitting in the back of his mind like a door that had been opened and was letting in a cold wind he had not yet turned to face. "It means," Kane said carefully, "that this pack has something rare and powerful within it. That comes with advantages and with the attention of those who would prefer the advantage belonged to them. We have faced that kind of attention before in different forms, and we have handled it by being exactly what we are: organized, loyal, and unwilling to be moved." He let that settle. "As for the full scope of what Aldrich's bloodline means, I intend to have a complete answer for this pack before the next full moon. I will hold nothing back when that answer is available." He looked across the crowd one final time. "This pack has stood for 400 years, he said. Not because of perfect decisions, not because every alpha before me did everything right, but because when the truth came out, and the truth always comes out, we faced it together and we did not let it break what we had built. He paused. Last night was difficult, today will be complicated. What comes next will require patience and steadiness from every wolf on this ground. He straightened slightly. I am asking for that. And I am asking you to extend the same patience and steadiness to my son, who has arrived in this pack without having chosen to be born into it, and who is now navigating something none of us can fully understand from the outside. He deserves that. He is Blackwood blood. He is one of yours. He stepped down from the stone. The assembly did not cheer, that was not the Blackwood way. But the sound that moved through the crowd as he stepped down was something better than a cheer. It was the low, settled, collective sound of a pack that had received a difficult truth and had decided together to stand inside it rather than around it. Marcus fell into step beside him as he moved through the crowd. Well done, Marcus said quietly. It needed to be said. Things do, most alphas don't say them. Kayne glanced at him. Have I told you recently that you are occasionally insufferable? Monthly, Marcus said. It keeps me grounded. They moved through the dispersing pack, wolves stepping aside with nods and lowered eyes as Kayne passed. He returned each acknowledgement with a look, not formal, just present, meeting each wolf for a second with the particular alpha attention that says I see you and you matter, which costs nothing and means everything in a pack structure. Aldrich was waiting at the edge of the assembly ground. He had watched the entire address from that position, slightly removed from both the platform and the crowd. Observing. Seemed to be his natural state, positioned where he could see everything without being in the center of it. Another thing Kayne noted that he understood from the inside. Your pack, Aldrich said when Kayne reached him, not a complete sentence, an observation with a question folded inside it. Your pack, Kayne said. Aldrich looked at him. I have not decided that. I know, Kayne said. I said it anyway. Something moved through Aldrich's expression, that complex, layered thing that was becoming familiar. You are going to be very difficult to argue with, aren't you? Universally reported, Marcus said from behind them. Aldrich looked at the beater, a long, assessing look. Marcus returned it with the untroubled equanimity of a man who had been assessed by dominant wolves for 18 years and had stopped finding it interesting. You trust him, Aldrich said to Kayne, about Marcus. Completely, Kayne said. He has never once told me what I wanted to hear when what I needed to hear was different. Kayne glanced at his beater. It is an infuriating quality and I recommend it in everyone. Aldrich was quiet, processing. The Eastern settlement, the family that raised me, there was no one like that there. Everyone told me what I wanted to hear because they were afraid of what I was. A pause, something underneath the words that he was not quite saying. It becomes very difficult to know what you actually are when no one will tell you honestly. Kayne looked at his son. The morning light was full now, no longer grey, warm and gold, and coming through the canopy overhead in those shifting pieces, moving across the assembly ground as the leaves turned in the early breeze. In that light, Aldrich looked, for just a moment, just a fraction of one, young. Not the controlled, self-contained, 25-year independent young man who had arrived last night with his decisions already made, but young in the way that all children are young when they describe the specific loneliness of growing up with no one honest enough to tell them the truth about themselves. I will tell you what you are, Kayne said, as honestly as I am able, starting with what I know and continuing as I learn more. He met his son's eyes. That is the only thing I can offer you that I can guarantee. Everything else, the pack, the territory, the bloodline, what Rael told you about engineered lineages, all of that we will work through together. But the honesty I can give you right now, today, without qualification. Aldrich held his gaze for a long moment. Then tell me, he said, what is in the archive? What did your beta find in the bloodline records last night? Kayne had been waiting for this. He had reviewed what Marcus had pulled from the archive in the early hours before the assembly, the old bloodline records, the inheritance charts, the ancient documentation that Blackwood had kept in a sealed room beneath the hall since the founding generation. He had read it in the cold pre-dawn light, while Sera sat beside him and Marcus stood at the door, and what he had found had rearranged something in his understanding of his own history in a way he was still absorbing. Walk with me, he said. They walked, Kayne, Aldrich, Marcus and Sera, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the assembly ground, and joined them without being asked, because she knew what had been found and had been waiting. In her own way, for this conversation since long before last night. They walked to the hall, through the main doors, down the corridor that ran beneath the building to the archive room below. The archive was low-ceilinged and cool, lined with wooden shelves that held sealed record cases going back 4 centuries. It smelled of old material and preservation resin, and the particular scent of very old information waiting to be used. The records Marcus had pulled were laid out on the central table. Kayne stood at the head of the table and looked at his son across it. Blackwood bloodline, he said, goes back 14 generations in documented form, Before that, oral history only. The documented records show standard dominant inheritance alpha to alpha, the strain strengthening over time as the line deepened. He placed his hand on the oldest of the laid-out records. But in the 7th generation, approximately 180 years ago, there is an anomaly. He turned the record so Aldrich could see it. The documentation was old, the language formal and archaic, but the bloodline chart was clear. In the 7th generation, the Blackwood Alpha of that time had taken a mate from outside the known pack territories. Not from a rival pack, not from an allied pack, from an unaffiliated line, a wolf whose bloodline origin was listed simply as elder descent. Elder descent, Aldrich said. He had read it before Kayne could point to it. Fast reader. Another note filed. Elder bloodlines are the oldest recorded wolf lineages in existence, Kayne said. Most pack historians treat them as mythological, the founding stock, the original wolves from which all modern packs descend. There are no living elder line wolves in the current territorial structure. The lineages were supposed to have dispersed and diluted over centuries until they disappeared into the general population. Supposed to have, Aldrich said. Look at the mate listed for the 7th generation Alpha, Kayne said. Aldrich looked, read the name, looked up. And now look at the Greywood records, Kayne said, placing a second document beside the first. These are not from our archive. Marcus obtained them from the Neutral Council registry. They are publicly held. The Greywood bloodline, 7th generation, same period. Aldrich looked at the second document. His eyes moved between the two. In the Greywood record, the 7th generation Alpha had also taken an outside mate, also listed as elder descent. The bloodline origin was identical in phrasing, in documentation style, in the specific notation that the Council registry used for unusual lineage entries. The same source, 2 packs, 1 century and 80 years ago. Both lines deliberately crossed with elder descent in the same generation, with documentation that used language too similar to be coincidental. Someone arranged it, Aldrich said quietly. Someone with access to both bloodlines, Kayne said, and with a long enough view to understand that what they were building would take multiple generations to fully emerge. He looked at his son. A full-spectrum dominant cannot be produced in one generation. The elder descent strain must be present in both parents, recessive, invisible, carried forward through multiple alpha pairings until the two lines combine and the dominant gene becomes active. Aldrich was very still, which means, he said slowly, that Blackwood and Greywood were both seeded with the same elder strain. And the full-spectrum dominant that was always going to result from combining those two lines, he stopped. Always going to be the child of a Blackwood Alpha and a mate carrying Greywood blood, Kayne finished. The archive room was completely silent. Sera spoke for the first time since they had entered. Her voice was very quiet. I carry Greywood blood, she said. Through my mother's line, we always knew there was a distant connection. It was one of the reasons the mating bond between Kayne and I was considered unusual. Cross-territory mate pairs are rare. Kayne looked at her. You knew this. I knew my mother's line had a Greywood connection, Sera said. I did not know what it meant. I did not know about the elder descent. I did not know any of this. She looked at the documents on the table. Your father may have known. He studied bloodline records more obsessively than any alpha in recent memory. If this pattern was visible to anyone, it would have been visible to him. Kayne thought about his father, about the order given to a 3-day-old child, about the word threat and the word dangerous, and the decision to remove Aldrich from the picture before he could become whatever the bloodline records suggested he was built to become. He thought about Rael, who had also found these records, who had spent 6 months positioning himself as the alternative to a father who did not know his son existed. And he thought about the question that was now sitting at the center of everything, cold and clear and unavoidable. Whoever had arranged the 7th generation crossing, whoever had seeded both bloodlines with elder descent 180 years ago, with enough foresight to understand that the result would be a full-spectrum dominant several generations down the line, that person or those people had intended this outcome, had intended Aldrich, had built toward him, across almost 2 centuries, using the most powerful bloodlines in the territory as the raw material. The question was not whether this had been done. The evidence on the table made that clear. The question was what they had intended Aldrich to do. Aldrich was looking at the documents. His hands were flat on the table on either side of them, those large, still hands, and his face was doing something Kayne had not seen it do before. The controlled calm was present, yes, the careful steadiness. But underneath it, visible now in a way it had not been before, was something raw. Something that was feeling the specific weight of discovering that your existence was not accidental, that you were not simply a rare biological outcome, a fortunate confluence of genetics, that you were a design thing, that someone had decided, long before your parents were born, that you needed to exist, There are few discoveries more disorienting than learning that you were intended. Kayne watched his son absorb this and did not look away. After a long moment, Aldrich lifted his eyes from the documents. Rail said he had answers, Aldrich said. He said he knew why the full-spectrum strain was created, not just that it was, he said he knew what it was for. Kayne held his son's gaze. Do you believe him? Aldrich was quiet. He was doing the careful internal assessment that was his nature, weighing, measuring, refusing to commit before the ground was solid enough. I believe he knows something, Aldrich said finally. Whether he has all of it, whether what he knows is true or is a version of the truth shaped to serve his purpose, I cannot say. Then we need to know what he knows, Kayne said. And we need to know it before he decides his patience with formal channels has run out and he finds another way to get what he came for. He looked at Marcus. Marcus, who had been standing at the edge of the room with his arms crossed and his face carrying the expression of a man who has been presented with a problem and is already 3 steps into solving it, raised his eyebrows slightly. Waiting. Send a message to Rail, Kayne said. Formal channel. Invite him to Blackwood Hall for a council-witnessed conversation. Neutral ground rules. Full transparency protocol. Whatever either party says is recorded and held by the council registry. He paused. He will come. He has wanted to talk since before last night. We are simply now doing it on ground where nothing he says can be used selectively. Marcus nodded and left the room. Kayne turned back to Aldrich. His son was looking at him with that expression again, the measuring one, the careful one, the one that Kayne was learning to read not as suspicion, but as the particular attentiveness of a young man who had spent his whole life deciding who was safe to trust and was applying that same process carefully and seriously to his own father. You are moving very fast, Aldrich said. Yes, Kayne agreed. Last night you did not know I existed. This morning you declared my blood before your pack. Now you are arranging meetings with the Alpha who has been my most significant outside contact for 6 months. A pause. I need you to understand that speed by itself does not build trust. Kayne looked at his son for a long moment. You are right, he said, simply, without qualification. Aldrich blinked. He had clearly prepared for a different response. I am moving fast because I have spent 25 years without time that belonged to us, Kayne said. And because the situation outside this hall is not waiting for us to go slowly. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and neither of them overrides what you just said. He held his son's gaze. I will move slower where slower is possible. I am asking you to tell me when it is not working rather than deciding privately that it is not. Another silence. Longer, and then Aldrich said with the careful precision of someone choosing to extend something they do not give easily, I can do that. Archive room was warm now. The morning had come fully into the hall above them, and the light was finding its way down through the gaps in the floor above, landing in thin bright lines across the old records on the table. Sera was watching both of them. Kayne looked at her and saw in her face something he had not seen there in a very long time. Something that was not quite relief, too complicated for that, too layered, too aware of all the things that still needed repairing. But something adjacent to it. Something that had been waiting a long time to exist and was only now beginning to believe it was allowed to. He held her gaze for a moment. She held his back. There was a great deal still between them that needed to be spoken. The full accounting of 25 years, the grief of what had been lost, the question of what trust looked like after a silence this long and whether it could be rebuilt and into what shape. None of that was resolved. None of it was even close to resolved, but it was present. It was named. It was no longer a thing living in the dark beneath everything else. And for now, in this moment, that was what they had. Above them, in the hall, footsteps moved as the pack went about its morning. The sound of Blackwood in motion, voices, boots on stone, the particular living noise of 237 wolves managing a day that had already been unlike any other. And somewhere beyond the eastern forest, past the Ashford marshes in the deep territories that held the answers to questions 180 years old, something was waiting. Something that had been patient for a very long time. Something that had built toward this moment. Toward this pack, this bloodline, this young man standing in his father's archive with old records spread in front of him, with a purpose that none of them yet fully understood. But would, before the next full moon. Before Rail arrived with his answers, shaped and selected for his own purpose. Before whoever had engineered this bloodline across 7 generations and 180 years had the chance to activate the thing they had so carefully, so patiently built, the morning held, the forest held, the hall held, but outside in the deep and ancient territories, something was finally beginning to move. The messenger returned from Greywood in less than a day. That alone told Kayne everything he needed to know about Rail's state of mind. A response in less than a day meant the Greywood Alpha had been waiting for the invitation, had expected it, had perhaps even engineered the conditions under which it would become inevitable, the border crossing, the council banner, the deliberate withdrawal, all of it a sequence designed not to win the night but to produce this exact outcome. A formal meeting. A table between two alphas. A space where information could be exchanged under rules that protected both parties. Rael was not coming to negotiate. He was coming to reveal. And that distinction, Kayne had learned in 30 years of dealing with difficult wolves, was the most important one you could make about an opponent before they walked through your door. The meeting was set for the following evening, at the hour when the moon first became visible, the traditional time for interpack discussions of significance, a custom so old no one remembered who had begun it, only that it had always been done this way. The hall was prepared. The long table in the formal receiving room was set with water and the neutral foods, fruit, bread, nothing that required a host's generosity to eat, because neutral ground protocol meant neither party was guest or host, but something in between. Marcus had arranged 4 council witnesses, 2 elder wolves from unaligned bloodlines who lived in the neutral territories between packs, and 2 from the registered council body itself. They arrived that afternoon, were given separate quarters, and were briefed on the nature of the meeting without being given Kayne's interpretation of what it meant. Council witnesses were required to receive facts, not framings. Aldrich spent the day in the archive. Kayne had given him unrestricted access, which had produced a visible but quickly controlled reaction of surprise in his son's face, the expression of someone who had expected to be managed and had been given something different instead. For most of the morning and into the afternoon, Aldrich sat at the central archive table with the bloodline records spread around him in an expanding radius, reading with the focused, unhurried attention of a wolf who was building a complete picture rather than looking for a single answer. Kayne checked in on him once in the mid-morning. Aldrich did not look up. He was cross-referencing 2 records, one in each hand, his eyes moving between them with the rapid precision of someone for whom information processing was a physical act. "Find anything new?" Kayne asked. 3 things, Aldrich said, still not looking up. "I will tell you at the meeting." Kayne stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he nodded, even though his son could not see it, and left. He found Sera in the herb garden. She was kneeling in the dirt at the far end of the garden beds, doing the kind of focused, repetitive physical work that Kayne had long understood was her method of thinking, not avoiding thought but channeling it, giving her hands something to do while her mind moved through something complicated. She had been coming to this garden for as long as Kayne could remember. He had never fully understood it until this morning, when he had realized that the garden, like so many other things about Sera, had a dimension he had never examined because he had never thought to look. He sat on the low wall at the garden's edge. She did not stop working, but she was aware of him. She was always aware of him. That had never changed through everything. They sat together in the afternoon quiet for a while without speaking. Then Kayne said, "I am not angry with you." Sera's hands stilled in the earth. "I was," he continued. "Last night, standing in that clearing, I was angry in a way I have not been angry since I was young enough not to know how to manage it. And underneath the anger there is something else that I have not fully looked at yet and will need time to fully look at." He paused. "But I am not angry with you. I want you to know that before tonight, because tonight is going to be difficult, and I do not want you to be carrying that uncertainty into it on top of everything else." Sera turned to look at him. Her face, in the afternoon light, was very open, stripped of the management and the careful arrangement that had been her constant companion for 25 years. She looked tired. She looked relieved. She looked like a woman who had been holding a wall up with her bare hands for 2.5 decades and had finally been told she was allowed to put it down. "I spent so many nights," she said quietly, trying to find the right moment, the right words, the right conditions under which telling you would not destroy everything we had built. She looked down at her hands in the dirt. "And I kept deciding it was not the right moment, and then more time would pass. And the longer it went, the more impossible it became to imagine doing it. The secret had become part of the structure of things. I was afraid that removing it would bring everything down." "Did not bring everything down," Kayne said. "No," she said. "It didn't." Another quiet. "His father's threat," Kayne said. "If he were alive, he is not," Sera said simply. "And I have spent a long time deciding how I feel about that." Kayne looked at her. "How do you feel about it?" She considered this honestly, the way she considered everything honest. "Grateful," she said finally, "which is a complicated thing to feel about a man's death, but truthful." Kayne nodded. He reached across the low wall and placed his hand over hers in the dirt. She turned her hand palm up and held his. They sat like that in the garden for a while, not saying anything else because there was nothing else that needed saying right now. The rest of it, the long accounting, the rebuilding, the careful work of understanding what their bond looked like on the other side of a secret this size, All of that was ahead of them. All of that would take time and honesty and the specific willingness to keep choosing each other through the difficult parts. But the choosing had already begun. That was what mattered. Rael arrived exactly at moonrise. He came with 2 of his own wolves, permitted under neutral ground protocol, and was met at the Blackwood Gate by Marcus and 2 of Kayne's senior warriors. No one touched weapons. No one raised voices. It was exactly the kind of arrival that happens when 2 very controlled, very intelligent sides have agreed on the rules in advance and both intend to follow them precisely. The formal receiving room held them all. Kayne at one end of the table, Rael at the other. The council witnesses along the sides. Marcus behind Kayne's left shoulder. Aldrich, who had come up from the archive an hour before with a look on his face that told Kayne he had found something significant and had decided when and how to present it, seated beside his father for the first time. Sera at Kayne's right. Rael looked at the seating arrangement when he entered. His eyes moved over Aldrich beside Kayne, and he absorbed the statement it made, deliberate, visible, unambiguous, without reacting to it outwardly. He sat down, folded his hands on the table in front of him, and waited for the formal opening. The senior council witness, an elder female named Voss, small and iron-haired, and with the bearing of someone who had been in more rooms like this one than everyone else present combined, opened the proceedings with the standard declaration. Neutral ground, full transparency, all statements recorded. No statement made in this room to be used outside it without the consent of the council body. Then she looked at Kayne. Alpha Kayne, you have requested this meeting. Please state your opening purpose. I am seeking information, Kayne said. Specifically, information that the Alpha of Greywood has indicated he possesses regarding the origin and intended purpose of the Elder Descent bloodline strain that was introduced into both the Blackwood and Greywood lines 7 generations ago. He looked across the table at Rael. I am asking him to share that information fully in this space under these conditions. Voss looked at Rael. Alpha Rael, do you agree to this scope? Rael looked at Kayne for a moment. Something in his expression had shifted from what Kayne remembered at the gate 2 nights ago. The careful, managed surface was still there, but it was sitting differently, less like armor, more like habit, like a man who has spent so long being guarded that he has to consciously remember how to be otherwise. Yes, Rael said. I agree, and then he began. What I am about to tell you is not theory, Rael said. He did not look at his notes because he had no notes. He had carried this for a long time. It is documented history from the Greywood archive, cross-referenced with council records and verified over 4 years of research. He paused. It begins not 180 years ago but 300. The room was very still. 300 years ago there was a war, Rael said. Not between packs, between wolfkind and something older. The histories we teach our cubs say this war never happened, that it is mythology. Legend. A story told to frighten young wolves into respecting the old laws. His eyes moved around the room. It was not mythology, it happened, and it nearly ended wolfkind as a functioning society. Kayne said nothing. Beside him he could feel Aldrich's attention sharpen. Enemy was not another pack, Rael continued. It was not another species, not in the traditional sense. The histories that survived, and very few did, because the losing side of that war made deliberate effort to erase the record of it, call them the Hollow Court. Elder wolves who had been alive so long they had separated from their humanity entirely. They existed only in wolf form, they could not shift back, and they had developed over centuries of continuous wolf existence, abilities that went beyond anything the modern wolf bloodline possesses. Kayne thought of the Hollow. The ancient power source that had surfaced briefly in the stories from the Eastern Territories. He had dismissed it as legend. They were defeated, Rael said, but not destroyed. A group of the surviving Alphas from the war era understood that the Hollow Court would eventually return. That the conditions that had produced them, extreme age, isolation, loss of human form, were not unique to that generation and would emerge again. And that when they did, the modern wolf bloodline would not be equipped to face them. He folded his hands on the table. So they made a decision. They built something, Kayne said. Rael looked at him. Yes, a bloodline, Kayne said. A specific genetic combination, Rael said. One that would produce a wolf capable of operating at the frequency of the elder wolves, able to perceive them, engage them, and match their level of dominance without losing human form. Without the 300 years of continuous shift that had made the Hollow Court what they were. He paused. A full-spectrum dominant, human and wolf in perfect simultaneous balance, the oldest abilities accessible without the cost that had made those abilities monstrous. Receiving room held this for a long moment. Aldrich spoke for the first time since the meeting had opened. His voice was very quiet, controlled. They built a weapon, he said. Rael looked at him directly. They built a guardian, he said. There is a difference. A weapon is pointed at something, a guardian chooses what it protects. They still made the choice, Aldrich said, across 7 generations of wolves who did not know they were part of it. Rael said, without flinching, without hedging. They did, and that is a wrong that cannot be corrected, only acknowledged. Aldrich was quiet, receiving this. The quality of his stillness was not the managed kind, it was the deeper kind, the kind that happens when information lands in a place that changes the shape of things, and the body needs a moment to adjust to the new configuration. Kayne looked at Rael. The Hollow Court, he said. You are telling me they are returning. Rael met his eyes. I am telling you they have already returned, that there have been 3 confirmed sightings in the deep northern territories in the past 8 months. That 2 unmated wolves from unaligned settlements have disappeared in the same period, in areas consistent with Hollow Court movement patterns. He paused, and that the reason I went east to find Aldrich 6 months ago was not territorial opportunism. Then what was it? Kayne said. Rael's hands on the table shifted slightly. The first genuinely uncontrolled movement Kayne had seen from him. It was panic, he said, flatly, without decoration. I had found the archive records. I understood what was coming. I knew that the full-spectrum dominant was the only thing in the modern wolf world that had any chance of standing against elder-level abilities, and I could not find any record of that dominant having been located or claimed by anyone. He looked at Aldrich. I went to find you because I was afraid, not because I wanted to use you, because I needed to know you existed and were alive and were, he stopped, steadied, capable, a long silence. And Aldrich said, and you were, Rael said simply. Aldrich looked at him across the table. Kayne watched his son's face cycle through something enormous with barely any of it reaching the surface. The discovery that the man who had offered him an alternative to his unknown father had not been purely calculating. The discovery that his own existence was tied to a 300-year-old war that no one had told him about. The discovery that the specific thing he was built to be was needed, urgently, right now, all of it moving through him in silence. Then Aldrich reached into the front of his shirt and withdrew 3 folded documents. He placed them on the table. I found these in the archive this morning, he said. He looked at Kayne. The third thing I found, I did not mention the first 2 because they were confirmations of what we already suspected. This is something different. Kayne looked at the documents. They were old, older than anything else Marcus had pulled from the archive. The material was brittle at the edges, the writing on them done in a hand that predated the current documentation style by generations. Founding Alpha of the Blackwood line, Aldrich said, had a brother. He let that sit. That brother chose not to lead. He was not dominant in the traditional sense, not aggressive, not territorial, but he was the one who understood the archive, who kept the records, who communicated with the council in the war era. Aldrich looked around the table. His name is in the founding records as the primary architect of the Elder Descent program. He was the one who arranged the 7th generation crossings, who selected the bloodlines, who designed the sequence that would eventually produce a full-spectrum dominant. A pause, and he left something in the archive. Hidden inside the record case for the 7th generation crossing, a letter. He unfolded the top document. I will read only the relevant section, he said. He found the passage. His voice, reading the archaic but still comprehensible language of a wolf who had died 2 centuries ago, was very steady. To the one who finds this, and you will find it because you were built to look, know that you were not made to be used. You were made to be ready. There is a difference that matters more than any other distinction in your life. Those who built you hoped for your existence. They did not own it. What you do with what you are belongs to no one but you. The court will come again. They always come again. But so do we. The receiving room was completely silent. Kayne looked at his son. Aldrich was looking at the letter. In his face, finally, fully visible, not managed or controlled or held back, was the expression of a young man who had spent his entire life not knowing what he was for. Who had grown up in a settlement of unmated wolves with no bloodline to anchor him, carrying a level of power that everyone around him was too afraid to address honestly, wondering in the private space of himself whether his existence had a point beyond simply being dangerous. It had just found in a 300-year-old letter written by a wolf who had never met him the answer, not an instruction, not a command, not Rael's carefully shaped offer or anyone else's design for what Aldrich should become, just the truth. Clean and simple, you were not made to be used. What you do with what you are belongs to no one but you. Kayne reached across the table and placed his hand briefly on the documents. Not claiming them, just acknowledging them. Acknowledging what they meant. Hollow Court, Kayne said, turning back to Rael. The 3 sightings in the north, what do you know about their movements, their numbers, what they want? And here for the first time Rael leaned forward, Not the contained, strategic lean of a man presenting a position, but the instinctive lean of someone who is relieved, finally, to be talking about the thing they have been carrying alone. That, Rael said, is why I needed to be in this room. He began to speak. He spoke for a long time. About the Hollow Court's known abilities, the capacity to affect wolf senses, to project dominance at a distance, to operate in a frequency that bypassed the rational mind and went directly to the wolf instinct, triggering fear responses and submission in wolves who had no idea why they were suddenly afraid. He spoke about the disappearances, the 2 unmated wolves, and 3 others that had not been formally reported because the packs involved were too afraid to admit vulnerability. He spoke about the Northern Territories and the specific landscape features, ancient forest, deep stone formations, areas where the land itself held a resonance that elder wolves responded to, that suggested the court was not wandering but gathering, building toward something. He spoke about the one thing that all the historical records agreed on. The Hollow Court did not move until they were ready, until the numbers were sufficient and the gathering was complete. And they did not announce themselves before they moved. They had no interest in diplomacy, in territory negotiation, in the systems of law and governance that the modern wolf world ran on. They were interested in one thing: returning the wolf world to what it had been before the shift. The human half had been incorporated into their nature, before the hybrid existence had softened and complicated and divided them. Before wolves had learned to love things that were not pack, not territory, not dominance, before wolves had, in the view of the Hollow Court, become lesser. They want to unmake the shift, Sera said. Very quietly, Rael looked at her. In every wolf they can reach, yes, they are not interested in killing, they are interested in converting, removing the human half and leaving only the wolf. He paused. In those 2 unmated wolves who disappeared, one was recovered. By accident, by a patrol from a neighboring settlement. He had been with the court for 6 days. What was he like? Marcus asked from behind Kayne's shoulder. Rael was quiet for a moment. He could still speak, he said finally. But he did not want to. Room held that. Kayne looked at Aldrich. His son was looking at the letter on the table. The 300-year-old words from a wolf who had understood what was coming and had left the only thing he could leave, a truth, written down for the one who would need it. You were not made to be used. What you do with what you are belongs to no one but you. Aldrich, Kayne said. His son looked up. Whatever you decide, Kayne said, I will support it. If you decide to go north and find out what we are dealing with, I will go with you. If you decide you need more time, more information, more preparation, more of anything, we take that time. If you decide after everything you have learned in the past 24 hours that this is not something you are willing to carry, he paused, I will not ask you to carry it. Aldrich looked at him for a long time. You would go with me, Aldrich said. North, you are my son, Kayne said simply. There is no version of this where I send you into something I am not willing to walk into beside you. Something broke in Aldrich's face. Not collapsed, broke the way a dam breaks when the water behind it has been pressing long enough, and the pressure finally exceeds the structure's capacity to hold. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was the very small, very complete breaking of a control that had been in place for 25 years, in the face of something it had not been built to withstand. Not danger, not threat. Not the revelation of 300-year-old wars and court sorcery and engineered bloodlines. A father who was going to go with him. It lasted only a moment. Aldrich pulled it back, the habit of containment too deep to fully release in a room full of people, but Kayne saw it. And Rael saw it. Sera, who had given this young man to strangers when he was 3 days old and had carried that weight every day since, saw it and pressed her hand flat against the table and breathed very carefully through her nose. Aldrich straightened. Reset, looked at Rael. What you offered me 6 months ago, Aldrich said. A place in Greywood, formal rank. The offer stands, Rael said. I am not coming to Greywood, Aldrich said. I think you already knew I would not. Rael looked at him for a moment. And then, for the first time in this meeting, something moved through his controlled expression that was not strategy. Not management, not the carefully arranged presentation of a patient alpha executing a long-built plan. Something that was, if Kayne was reading it correctly, genuine. Yes, Rael said, I knew. I am willing to work with you, Aldrich said. On this, not under you, not as a Greywood asset. As an independent operative with Blackwood standing, in a joint effort between the 2 packs to understand what the Hollow Court is doing in the north and to address it before it reaches a point that neither pack can manage alone. He looked at his father. Kayne nodded. Aldrich looked back at Rael. Rael considered for exactly 3 seconds. Yes, he said. The council witnesses, who had been recording every word of this exchange with the practiced neutrality of their role, exchanged a brief look. Voss made a notation in the formal record. The agreement between Blackwood and Greywood, spoken in a receiving room under moon and witness, was now a matter of council record. The meeting continued for another hour. Logistics, timelines, what information each pack would share and through what channels. Rail's intelligence on the Northern Territories. Kayne's knowledge of the relevant pack geographies. The framework of a joint operation that had never been attempted between these two packs in living memory. When Rail finally stood to leave, he looked across the table at Kayne. "Owe you an apology," he said, "for the border crossing, for the council banner, for the approach that was not what it should have been given what I actually needed." Kayne studied him. "Why did you not simply come to my gate and tell me what you knew?" Rail was quiet for a moment. "Because I did not know if you would believe me. Because I did not know," a pause, the careful kind, "what kind of alpha you would be about a son you had never known, whether you would acknowledge him or manage him, whether you were someone I could trust with something this important." "Now," Kayne said. Rail looked at Aldrich, at Sera, at the documents on the table and the room and the pack that had come into alignment around something difficult with a speed and steadiness that spoke of a deep, well-built foundation. "Now," Rail said, "I know." He left. The receiving room exhaled. Marcus began the practical work immediately. There was always practical work, and Marcus was the kind of beater who found that grounding rather than burdensome. The council witnesses were seen to their overnight quarters. The formal record was sealed and copied. The logistical notes from the second half of the meeting were organized for morning. Kayne sat at the emptied table. Aldrich sat beside him. They were quiet for a while. The specific quiet of two people who have been through an enormous amount of territory together in a very short time and have arrived temporarily at a place where nothing is required of them. "Things," Kayne said finally. Aldrich looked at him. "You said you found 3 things in the archive this morning. You told me the third. What were the first 2? Aldrich almost smiled. The preliminary sketch of one, like the night before, but a degree closer to completing itself. The first was confirmation of the elder descent crossings, as we discussed. The second was a secondary bloodline record, showing that the founding architect, the brother, had left one additional instruction in the council registry, which was that when the full-spectrum dominant was finally born, Aldrich said, the council was to be notified immediately, and the dominant was to be informed that the elder descent endowment includes a specific capacity that no modern wolf possesses. He paused. The ability to perceive the hollow court before they project, before they reach a wolf's instinct. The full-spectrum dominant can feel them coming the way other wolves cannot. Kayne looked at his son. "And can you," he asked, "feel things other wolves cannot?" Aldrich was quiet for a moment, looking at the table, at the letter, at his own hands. "I have been feeling something for 6 months," he said. "From the north, something old and cold and patient. I did not know what it was." He looked up. "Now I do." The moon was high outside the hall windows. Full and white and ancient, the same moon that had looked down on the founding alphas and their decisions, on the 7th-generation crossings, on the letter left in an archive for someone not yet born. The same moon that had looked down last night on a clearing, a secret, and a father who had not known his son existed. Kayne looked at Aldrich, this young man who had arrived 24 hours ago with nothing but a question, and had left with answers none of them had expected, and felt the full weight of everything that had passed between then and now. The grief of 25 years, still present, still needing its full reckoning. The long road of rebuilding that lay ahead between himself and Sera. The complexity of a son who was not a child and would not be treated as one, and was wise enough to know exactly what he was worth. And the thing that was moving in the north, patient and cold and old. None of it was resolved, all of it was beginning. That was the nature of real things. They did not conclude cleanly. They opened into each other, one truth revealing the next, one door leading to a corridor that led to another door. Real things did not end, they continued. And Kayne looked at his son, and his son looked back at him, and between them in the quiet of the hall was the beginning of something that 25 years of absence and one night of revelation had not managed to prevent. It was still alive. It was, in fact, only just starting. Outside, the ancient forest held them. The moonlit grounds were quiet. The pack moved through its evening in the way packs do, breathing, living, trusting that the thing at the center of them was steady enough to hold. It was. And in the north, past the territories and the borders and the deep geography of a world built on blood and bond and the oldest laws of their kind, something cold opened its eyes. And felt, for the first time, something it had not felt in 300 years. Something that had not existed in the world long enough to be a threat. Until now, the end, and that is where we leave them. Kayne, who spent 25 years as one of the most feared alphas alive, and discovered in a single night that the thing he feared most was a clearing, a secret, and the face of a son he had never met. Sera, who carried a weight so heavy it should have broken her and carried it anyway for 25 years because that is what love looks like when it has nowhere safe to go, and Aldrich, built across 7 generations, designed before his parents were born, raised by strangers. Found by the wrong man first and the right one second. Standing now at the edge of something ancient and dangerous with his father beside him and his mother behind him, and a letter from a dead wolf telling him the only thing that ever needed to be said. You were not made to be used. What you do with what you are belongs to no one but you. If this story reached something in you, if you stayed from that first 15 seconds all the way to this final word, then you already know what this channel is. This is where stories live that are built to last. Stories with weight and warmth and the kind of twists that do not feel cheap because they were earned the right way. We are not done. There are more stories, more alphas, more secrets kept too long and truths arriving exactly when they are supposed to. More worlds built in ancient forests under full moons where everything is dangerous and love is the most dangerous thing of all. Subscribe right now. Not later. Now. Because the next story is already coming and you do not want to be the person who finds it 3 episodes in and has to catch up. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a drop. And leave a comment below, I want to know. Who moved you most in this story? Kayne discovering his son, Sera finally letting the secret go, or Aldrich reading a letter from a wolf 300 years dead and finding out he was never an accident? Tell me. I read every single one. This has been your story, and we will see you in the next one.